Hey everyone, this is David Wolinsky back with another audio interview from the archives of NoDon'tDie.com. This time I'm bringing you the first half of my conversation with Peer Schneider, the general manager of IGN. This originally took place on February 8th, 2017. If you'd like to read a full transcript of the interview, please check the link below, and also below you'll see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps continue to support this project. Thanks.
Sure. I'm Peer Schneider. That's P-E-E-R. I am the general manager of IGN Entertainment, working out of our San Francisco headquarters. Been with the company for 19 years. And how old am I? 46.
Okay.
46? No, I'm 45. Sorry.
I thought I heard a question mark there.
Oh, I'm 46. Damn. Jesus. How'd that happen?
I can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess just talk a little bit about, it's always weird to sort of give context for yourself, but basically it's just talk enough about your career writing about video games so that if someone who has never heard of IGN or your byline,
Sure.
they'd understand why I'm asking you sort of about the game industry and about the media about the game industry.
So I grew up in Germany, and video games were always around me. My first console was a Fairchild Channel F when I was a wee young lad, and really loved games and Atari and Commodore 64 like all good German kids. Kind of fell out of love with gaming when I went to high school and then college. I went to college in Japan and just kind of had completely divorced myself from video games. And a friend of mine bought me, and my wife, my now wife, bought me a Super Famicom, the Super NES Japanese version, for my birthday while I was in Japan. And I started playing, and I'm like, oh my God, just playing Mario and Link to the Past, like games had gotten so far. I had ignored the NES era of games, really, kind of stopped after the Atari and home computer days. And it sucked me right back in, and I played through everything Japan at the time had to offer, all the Final Fantasies, went back to a lot of the NES classics, and really got hooked. And when I moved to the U.S. And I studied journalism as a side project, I created a fan site called Nintendojo, where I took Nintendo because I felt like it was manageable from a game release volume. The N64 wasn't like the PlayStation. I had these hundreds and hundreds of games. So I picked that, created a fan site, and started writing bigger kind of feature articles, which really didn't exist at the time. So, if you're thinking about the 1994, 1995 time, you would find them in magazines, but not online. And that caught the attention of a lot of people, and it eventually led to me applying for a job with Imagine Media, a San Francisco Bay Area-based, mostly magazine publishing house that was expanding into online. They had launched a website called N64.com, and I had seen a press release that the editor-in-chief of that website was moving on to do something bigger at the company. So I cold emailed them and said, "How about it? Here's my fan site." They already knew my name from that site, and I walked in and nabbed the job. And so, my career since then, I've been loyal to the IGN brand. IGN already existed as kind of a loose network of single platform sites when I joined. I was there to help launch it as a standalone website brand, branch out, and have been there for obviously the last 19 years, turning a small network that was kind of the redheaded stepchild in a publishing business into the prime business within a publishing company.
So, yeah, I mean, I looked at your LinkedIn, and I know we talked before. It's so rare these days to see a resume or a profile on LinkedIn where someone's been at a place for 19 years, and you scroll down and you see different titles next to the same logo. Mm-hmm. So I think you mentioned this already with sort of, well, I think you used the phrase, lifestyle brand or lifestyle outlet. I'd just be curious to hear you talk about, how does IGN see itself today? I mean, is it strictly a lifestyle outlet? Do you guys consider yourselves a news outlet? How do you see yourselves?
So IGN is first and foremost an entertainment site, right? And back in 1999, we decided that it wasn't just about cheats and game help and reviews of video games, but that there was a segment, an audience that cared greatly about this content, also wanted to know how how everything is made, wanted the behind the scenes stuff, and we expanded into that. But then also really liked adjacent genres in other media forms like sci-fi movies or comic books. And so in 1999 we added that content to IGN. And so for a while we actually went fully on into male lifestyle. I mean, very, still centered around games, but a little bit more of a Maxim feel to it in the early days, which is something that we left behind. As gaming became more inclusive and the audience of gamers changed from a very kind of hardcore 99% male setup to something that is broader, we made sure to also change the focus of our company and leave behind some of that stuff. Mm. But we are I'd say we are a company of thirds in that. Probably a third of what we do is giving people advice on how to beat a game, how to get the most out of it with like wikis and strategy guides. Mm-hmm. A third is to tell people what's going on, like news and when is the new Star Wars movie coming out and how was Grand Theft Auto 5 made and all that. And then a third is the purchase advice and commerce angle where, is this game any good? You can read or watch a review and kind of get all that, the expert opinion from somebody who played it. Mm-hmm. And throughout all that, it's about fact, but it's also about entertainment, right? We want to make sure that people who are watching the news also get news analysis that is appropriate for the genre and the space we cover. It's not CNN, right? We're not super serious about everything. We're having fun with the content.
Well, so, I mean, you mentioned a bit about, attempts to make the video game audience more inclusive. Do you think there should be more criticism about the video game industry and the way that it works?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, that's not been our calling traditionally to be very critical of the video game industry, right? I think they're ombudsmen and they're kind of like, if you think of games business publications or Gamma Sutra sites that are really focused on the industry, they're very good at it, and they have the audience that really likes and wants that content. So it might be a little bit too inside baseball for us, but when it applies to the consumer, that is certainly something that we take seriously. Just take the very thought of monetizing games with additional subscription services, microtransactions, like anything that affects the consumer, or somebody looking forward to a game and buying a console to buy a game to only see that canceled. Those are issues in the industry with planning and marketing that we do address and that we feel very passionate about.
Well, how much of maybe this is true of the media overall, but how often do you feel that games media today is just chasing clicks? Well,
I think it depends on your position, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a small site, I think you're a little bit more susceptible to the concept of getting someone to click on your piece of content and sharing it. Now, we're fortunate enough in that we have a vibrant homepage that's been around for 19 years where people come just to kind of browse content and find something entertainment. But we're also a big site that ranks very highly in search, and we have a big YouTube channel, and we have big social channels. And so the pressure is certainly on us to generate the necessary impressions to serve our ads or to distribute content, sponsored content with integrations, all that. Every business has that pressure. But it's becoming less about writing a headline that at all costs gets somebody to click through. And you still see that. I mean, like if you look at any website has the kind of the circulation units at the bottom, your Outbrain and Taboola. We use ZergNet. And if you look at a lot of the headlines, they're very focused on getting the click. And then when you land on the page, you are on a template that requires you to read one article, requires you probably to click through 10 different pages sideways right? Sideways is never an awesome direction for the internet. It's good for mobile, swiping.
Yeah.
Where they could get that information to you in a simple one-page document that is beautiful and that could be highly monetized. But it's kind of like the old web bleeding through of trying to churn as many page views because that might be the metric they're chasing, or as many ad views as possible without thinking of the audience. And so about 2 years ago, we sat down. IGN has a lot of templates, a lot of pages, lots of designs that have been around for a long time. We sat down, we said, okay, let's say we're user first. How do you fix some of the challenges around how we monetize and how we present content? And so, this last month in January, we launched a new template for our top 100s. Top 100s, our audience loves them. They love them because they want to debate whether our number one pick is the right one, but they also just love the kind of like scrolling through and remembering the greatest moments in games and movies. And so it used to be a page that was literally 101 pages, an intro page, and then each entry was one page with ads on the. It was not user friendly, and the audience kept on complaining about it as well. And for the longest time, we said, well, unfortunately, you got to make money, you got to, and there's no easy way to do it. And so last month we launched a new template. It's endless scroll. You can access an entire list in one go, but we changed the metric that we measure. Instead of measuring page views, we measure engagement, and we can measure virtual page views, for example, if we wanted to. But it's more about how long the audience engages with the content. If you could refresh ads or show ads again as they scroll down the page.
Well, is that something that you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it. It's just as an example. That's where I think we're fortunate in that we have a large audience and we don't have to compete so hard just to get somebody to a piece of content, where we have the ability to change something that, quite frankly, like we would have never changed if the only KPIs were how much money does a page make.
Well, is that something that you feel IGN ever did, was trying to chase clicks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, anyone in the business looked at their goal as being, expanding to a bigger audience, getting more users to come, and then getting more out of the users who frequent the site. So when somebody comes once and watches a video, immediately as a leader of the business, you say, how can I make it so that they watch 2 videos? Because I want to be able to make more money, obviously, right? And running media is expensive, as you know.
Yeah.
And so we did chase that, and I think there was definitely an early period, like we're talking about the 90s, where we wrote some kind of deliberately funny or snarky headlines that I would term to be clickbait nowadays. You know, kids on the internet use clickbait for everything. A smart headline that gets you to click and rewards you with awesome content is not clickbait, right? But there were definitely
good writing is what that is. Yeah.
Then where we just kind of almost did the Onion-like headlines on purpose as a joke to get people in, and part of the audience enjoyed it and part of the audience probably didn't.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the 90s, and a lot of IGN's contemporaries from then, as I'm sure you know, are not around anymore.
Correct.
It's too heavy a word to say burden, but I mean, is there some sort of burden that comes with being around for so long, and especially being established kind of before the rise of the internet for publishing?
Well, I think the burden is that there's an audience that thinks they know who you are, right? Even though if you look at our trajectory in the last 19, 20 years, you can see how many times we changed our business. I mean, we were literally 70% cheat traffic at one point, all kind of like the Game Sages era of people looking up codes for games. That was the big term.
Did you predate GameFAQs.com? Is that possible?
I don't think I don't know. No, I think
maybe it was parallel.
Was earlier. So GameFAQs and Game Sages were both IGN affiliate partners at the site. So they were independently operated, but they joined the IGN affiliate network. So we sold the ad. And then in the end, we bought Game Sages, the cheat site, and GameSpot bought, I think CNET at the time, bought GameFAQs, the facts text FAQ site.
Right.
And so, we already had a separate sheet site on IGN, basically merged it with Game Stages, and that brand disappeared into IGN at that point. And so back then, we were really focused on that game help angle and reviews. And then if you look now, we're a very video driven business. We create show content. We've got vibrant podcasts, which, quite frankly, that's our marketing. It's how we connect with an audience. It doesn't really make you a lot of money, but it's important to connect with an audience. And so the burden is there to explain to people that, we change, every generation, every console generation that comes out, we organize differently. We chase different types of content. We're a different business now. There are teens out there who only know IGN as a Snapchat Discover channel, for example.
Well, what's weird to you about the video game industry? I ask everyone this question, and I don't mean anything by it. I'm just curious, what you think is sort of idiosyncratic or strange about the way that it works today.
I mean, about the industry in general, or about media? I would say
both, probably.
About media, one really big issue with games and entertainment media is that I think a lot of publications have lost sight of who their audience is.
How so?
Well, there's very little connection between the writers on a lot of media property audience that frequents them. And you'll see the same in hard news, right? Like, it's the moment you bring politics into the game, half of the audience is going to hate you for the piece you love, and the other half is going to love you for the piece you write. And in games media, when you write about PlayStation being great, the Xbox fans are pissed off at you. And I think that's created a negative tone between the creators of media and the consumers of media, and I think a lot had given up early on. Basically said, "Oh, commenters are terrible. We don't engage with them," and the community is something that kind of like is supposed to exist on its own, and it goes all the way to YouTube channels too. And so one thing that I think we were very good at in the very beginning was that kind of interplay with the community, where we highlighted community content, we brought it in. Certainly our wikis have a huge community factor. We are highly commented on site, but I think in recent years, there has been so much animosity, if you think of the Gamergate movement and all that, where the audience was just highly suspicious of every piece you wrote. And I think a lot of journalists then in turn didn't even bother to engage back because it was such a negative tone. And so that's something in games and entertainment media that I think is weird and terrible and needs to be fixed. That relationship needs to be reestablished. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to love you or that you're going to love everybody back, but journalists have fled to Twitter instead of staying in their own houses.
Well, I remember we talked when we met up about, you mentioned, I had in my notes from when we talked that you had some favorite conspiracy theories you've heard from the audience as far as how they perceive the industry or the media to work. I don't want you to mock your audience, no. But are there sort of popular or really out there conspiracy theories that maybe always make you laugh or that you find are pervasive and that other people violently believe? Well,
there's the pervasive belief that all media is corrupt, and you see this in today's political coverage too, right? Where depending on what group you look at, there's this deep mistrust that everything is rigged to be negative, and everything is about an agenda that is not motivated by sharing information or telling the truth, but an agenda for some nefarious outcome. And there's certainly voices and publications that lean one direction or the other in games media, and especially when you're dealing with younger audience, right? Like, gamers now are no longer just the 20-year-old kids. Like, you get 10-year-olds playing games and being active on YouTube and following their favorite personalities, and you get 50-year-olds who have been through it and are still playing games and are really interested in the games industry and the behind-the-scenes stuff. And so those audiences intersect in a lot of places. And I think you'll find this very often, that when someone says something, it'll become a it'll become a meme, right? I have a good example for you. That's too much water. Have you ever heard too much water?
I have not.
So this is a meme that was spawned by a Pokemon review on IGN, where the reviewer kind of put a little summary point at the end. You know, we used to have these summaries that say like great graphics or, you know, awesome storyline. One of the demerits was too much water. So it's obviously not literally saying that the game contains water, right? It's a kind of tongue-in-cheek summary of something that's supposed to get you to read the article. And so if you read the article or watch the video, it will say the game is set on an island, and so the developers decided to overwhelm the game with water-type Pokemon. And that choice makes the game really imbalanced. And like I've got an overpowered electric type to show for it. And so compared to traditional Pokemon games where it was all about giving you the choice, like what team to build and what Pokemon to pursue, this was a criticism of the game when it first shipped. And then it was a criticism renewed again when the updated version shipped, and the reviewer said, I wish they had fixed that. The other thing is that there's so many bodies of water in the game that you constantly have to use this surf ability, which means you give up a slot and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Maybe a little bit too in the weeds on how Pokemon works. But the point was the reviewer, she described what too much water meant. Now, there is a big portion of the audience that never went to the description and only took too much water, took that as kind of like this mock hymn and amplified it to the point where now if you Google too much water or you see comments on IGN content, you'll always find one guy saying too much X IGN as a quote. And that's okay, right? It's like it becomes this funny little thing that lives on its own. But the original meaning is lost. And so there is a portion of the audience that actually believes IGN screwed up and has this kind of weird, crazy line of criticism in a review that doesn't make sense. When, in fact, if you dive deeper, you see it's true. And so that's the kind of culture where, you know, when somebody says, this is a paid review, and nobody from the game's media publication shows up to say, guys, it's not. I just didn't like this game, right? That statement can become a meme and can become a hymn that is repeated, and it gets passed down. It's Purple Monkey Dishwasher. It gets passed down. And suddenly the fifth person to get that message goes, I heard from so many people that reviews are paid for, therefore you can't trust any of them. And so that's kind of like the funny challenge that becomes even bigger when journalists don't engage with the audience and say, your conspiracy doesn't work, because if a publisher could pay me for a review, how come we have negative reviews on the site? And how come I have a negative review from that same publisher? And how come publishers who advertise don't also get negative reviews, right? Like there are all these kind of, when you go down the rabbit hole, you can explain it all and you can prove that it's not the case, but nobody takes the time to actually do that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Nintendo. I mean, so like the memes I can think of, I don't know if these ever became as huge as what you're talking about, but like you know, my body is ready, or my personal favorite was I'm sure you remember that E3 where Reggie kept saying that this year it's all about the coins. Yep. It's interesting because something that Nintendo has in common with IGN is that they date back at least to the 90s, whereas a lot of the rest of the industry is somewhat more new. I've done interviews with other people who felt like Nintendo, sort of their corporate character, has rippled down into today in all sorts of odd different ways. Like, for example, I think it's more Japanese business culture style of just sort of the lack of just transparency into sort of a wide variety of creative decisions, sort of how the companies work internally. Are there ways you think today in 2017 we're still sort of feeling the decisions Nintendo made in 1987?
Well, for sure. I mean, you can't ignore what happened with the PlayStation add-on for the Super NES, right? When Nintendo vehemently defended the decision to produce consoles with a cartridge-only media.
Right, which they're still sticking to because they're going back to cartridge.
They're going back. I mean, ironically, now it really makes sense. Now it makes sense because having a spinning drive with an optical disc on the go is battery consuming, can be damaged, right? It's not a good idea. And this is kind of like that halfway step between having an all digital device, but still giving the traditional console or handheld gamer that little, that removable media format that they crave so much. So there are definitely decisions like that affect them today. I mean, Xbox is a great example where Xbox's worst E3 was when they announced how DRM was going to be handled, right? And the audience freaked out. And I think it's a little bit like the too much water syndrome, where the message was repeated so many times that I think the good in Microsoft's decision was completely ignored in favor of the bad, kind of the fear of a game console becoming like a computer. Like nobody's complaining nowadays about downloading a Steam game and it's tied to your account, right? Like you're not saying, well, I want to take the disc out on my PC and give it to my friend. You don't worry about that because this is how it's been for so many years, but people really lost their minds over Microsoft wanting to do something where you own the game assigned to your account, and people overlooked the fact that they were creating a lending program where you could actually share a digital game with your friends as well. Like a lot of that was kind of drowned out by the negativity. Not to say that some or most of it wasn't deserved. Like the way they rolled out the messaging was just really terrible, right? And Sony really played into that. But that's an example where I think we don't sometimes hear the core because there's so many voices then amplifying the bad.
Right. Well, and I think there's also sort of an industry tendency to not weigh in on every single sort of kerfuffle or misinterpretation, don't you think?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I always liken gaming to sports, right? Where you are passionate about certain players, you're passionate about certain teams, and you're passionate about like the outcome of the battles, and like all that kind of fandom is built into gaming. And there are diehard PlayStation fans, or diehard Xbox fans, or Nintendo fans who would not even entertain buying another machine, even if they could afford it, and if they can afford it. They just love what this company stands for, and they will disregard everything else. And so every little misstep, every little announcement can blow up into this, Deflategate kind of scandal that you argue to the death.
I remember E3 that year, where Sony announced that you would be able to purchase used games, and I remember. I don't know I don't know if it's only media and industry in those things, because it seems like an odd, like almost general audience reaction that at a E3 press conference Sony is like, and you could purchase used games, and like I remember that got a standing ovation. Do you remember that? Were you there?
Yeah, so that was exactly what I was talking about. PlayStation, Sony really played into Microsoft's misstep and basically said, hey, all those things that Microsoft doesn't want to let you do, the PlayStation will do it, right? And honestly, I think it swung the favor into the PlayStation corner. The Xbox 360 was a formidable competitor, right? And the Xbox One is not even close to the PlayStation 4 when it comes to install base now. And so I think these kinds of movements can be very, very powerful. And in the publishing media space, let's not forget what happened to Dig.com, for example, right? That was a platform that enabled lots of users to discover content around the web, and they changed their focus and their algorithms, and the audience just basically said, thank you, goodbye. And that's a very powerful thing. And, as someone running a media company, I'm always conscious of that, right? Like you got to challenge your audience. You got to give them the bad news, and you sometimes have to tell them, no, you're wrong. You're not understanding what the issue is. But you're always risking also ticking off a portion of the audience. And, I hate to lose any reader or viewer, but, that's just not possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned a bit about criticism of video games. You also mentioned in our email a bit about the social currency that exists within video games and titles and reviews.
Yep.
Can you explain a little bit about that for readers who don't pay attention to these types of nuances, or maybe have never read a game review? Can you just explain a little bit about that and maybe what you wish would change about that?
Well, a game review serves a couple of purposes. One is to really inform a user whether a game turned out well, right? Or whether they should quickly run and cancel their pre-order because it's not as good. A game review is never meant to be kind of the end-all, be-all verdict because we have so many different tastes. And as much as we'd like to find someone who represents a game genre or the taste of the general audience, you'll always have an outlier and somebody who doesn't like a game that you might like. And so the content of a game review is designed to give people the information to make a decision of their own. Hey, if you don't mind cheesy deaths, like this game is super hard, this game is for you, but I didn't enjoy that, therefore it's not my favorite game, right? Like that's the content found in the review. But then there's the score, and the score is meant to make it very simple for a less engaged audience to get a quick verdict on something. You're at your GameStop and you want to buy a game, you go to IGN, you quickly look at the most recent reviews, you go 9, okay, I got to pay attention to it, right? And if you're not as discerning as the people who consume like the entire review and the content around it, that might be enough for you. And then there's the social currency part, which you brought up, which is I love this game. I haven't played it yet, but I love it because the art style, I don't mean this in a snarky way. It's like the art style.
No, it's a laugh of recognition.
I love the fact that it has biomechanical dinosaurs, or it's based on like a steampunk universe, which I read all these books about, right? So you have this affinity towards a franchise, and then when a established voice and a critic comes in, someone you trust or somebody who has power and high viewership, that number becomes social currency to say, all of you disagreeing with me being excited for this game are wrong because IGN gave it a 9.5, right? And so that social currency is really important. Metacritic is a great example. It's a very small website, right? It's not read by a humongous audience out there. It is certainly used by the games industry, but commenters who are kind of fighting these "my game's better than you," your game wars, are using the Metacritic ranking as a metric, as a social currency to say, no, you're all wrong. And they also use it against us, right? My favorite is always we gave a movie a 7 and said it was good, and then somebody comes in and says, well, it's a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, IGN, therefore you're wrong. We're like, no, we are part of that 95% because that measures how many reviews were positive, and our 7 was positive, right? Like, but it becomes this kind of ammo in the battle for discussion and opinion and who's right or wrong. It's fun to watch, and it is what it is. There's no you can't say, well, take away ratings and scores and it'll go away. It won't go away, right? Like you will always have to give people a summary about of your opinion. There's an audience that doesn't spend as much time, and so if you get rid of scores, they'll just use an adjective or something like Metacritic will make up a score for you.
Do critics really have that much power in the game space?
Well, I mean, first of all, critics can be anyone nowadays, right? Anyone with an audience can be an influential critic. A YouTuber like a Markiplier, for example, can play a game and say, I'm having fun, and certainly influence people to go out and buy it. And, I got to think, like when I look at some of our popular reviews, which get viewed by more than 1 million people each just on the web, not even counting like YouTube, Snapchat, all that, I got to think that when you have that volume of people, you do have an impact. Now, does that mean that you have that you're the sole decision maker? Certainly not, right? I mean, look at the Transformers movies. People go to see them because they love giant robots blowing up stuff, and it doesn't matter if all critics say these movies are no good. It's like you go, well, how bad could it be? Or you're the type of person who does not live by critics and gets all their advice from their friends. Now, there is a chain, though, and I hear this often where somebody says, well, all my decisions are just informed by my friends' recommendations, and somebody recommended something to your friend. And
right.
It's not a friend who may have found a recommendation elsewhere, right? Like the way we discover content is definitely through media, whether that's, critics or just people exposing and highlighting content across all these different platforms.
No, I only have 6 friends, and they never use the internet.
Right.
And they basically live in a cave, and they're my royal tasters.
Yeah, I get this. I see this in action with my kids. When my kids say to me, like, "Did you see they announced this? They announced the sequel to Mass Effect." I'm like, "Yeah, we did that on IGN."